Hi guys, Ali Duzette here, and this is my good friend Lila Sage, and she studies astrocartography, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Lila, but it has to do with taking the star chart and applying it to the actual geographic locations of the Earth. And so each of these lines that you're seeing, if you look at the very top of the page, you can see that there's like a little Mercury up here and an ascendant, and then there's like this line that goes down. And then I don't know if you can you see my cursor on the page? There's
No.
like this oh, there you go, there's your cursor.
Hmm.
If you want to point to the Mercury line, so people can kind of like see what they're seeing. But I
Okay.
asked her to go ahead and run some charts for this eclipse, and share her thoughts on the geographical locations involved and other stuff like that. So okay, Lila, take it away, tell us everything.
Awesome. So the red line here that you see is the path of the eclipse, which probably people have guessed so far. But the first thing we need to know about astrocartography is that astrolocation and astrocartography is all about angles in the birth chart. So there are four angles in the birth chart, right? There's the ascendant and then the descendant. There's the midheaven and then what we call the IC. And so each of those, take on a different flavor when we apply them to the earth or a geographical location. So all of the planets that you're seeing, just like Ali pointed out, each of them is going to be attached to one of these angles. And the AS stands for the ascendant, right? The DS is then going to be the descendant. The midheaven is going to be the MC. And of course, the IC is going to be, you can't really see it because there's not very many on this page, but down at the bottom, there are a couple ICs.
Oh,
And so when we look at each of these planets, what they're doing, we attach their meaning to the angle. So, I'll just quickly explain a little bit about what the four angles mean when we apply them to a chart like this. So the ascendant is usually about, the culture, the values. If you think about the ascendant in a birth chart, it usually means, that's how your people first see you. That's how, your front door, when people open your front door. And so this is going to imply for something like a country, when we apply this to the world, the way that this country is seen, the way that the country's culture comes off. And then a descendant, of course, in a birth chart, that has to do with your relationships, what you like about other people. And so on a map, that applies to partnerships, right? World partnerships, our global alliances, and the way other people are seeing this country, interacting with this country or this area, this geographic location. And then the midheaven is just like in our birth chart. Midheaven's often about career, our legacy, things like that. And so this is going to apply to the legacy of the country, the way that the country shines, what the country's known for. Of course, it's going to kind of apply to money, right? Because it's about career and um, businesses, usually in a birth chart. And then the IC, when we talk about the IC, it has to do with the land itself, has to do with like the emotions, the traditions of the people, because the IC usually has to do with, right, the family and the ancestry, all those kinds of things. So, for a country, that's going to have to do with, its roots, its traditions, its family, orientation or not orientation, the way that the people feel in that country about that country, those emotions. So um, here, what we're seeing at this time along this eclipse, because just like when we look at transits, right? The transits are the way that the planets are moving, or the way that we view the planets moving from Earth. And so when we look at astrocartography, we're seeing the same thing. These lines, they shift over time, right? Just because all the moon is, constantly shifting, and all these planets are constantly shifting. And so for our country right now, for the United States, we're looking at a lot of ascendant themes. And that's the first thing I want to point out about this eclipse is that this time around, we are seeing, a shadow going over a lot of the ways our country has been viewed, a lot of our traditions, our values. The way that we are looked at in the world is going to change. Something's going on with the way that America in general is being looked at around the world and the way that it presents itself, the way that it forwardly speaks. And so some of the themes that we're seeing here, right, are going to have to do with we've got Mercury, communication, our past wounds, the wounds that are presenting, our health, the way that we think of our identity and our needs, femininity and our spirituality, even how we get some stuff done, money, and the way we do business, our home life. So really it seems like, in some ways everything is changing or everything is kind of getting a shadow passed over it. Do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, I do. So I'm looking at all of these and above and below, and it looks like almost every major planet has an ascendant line, or it's like the ascendant theme is linked to every major planet, which is going to say
Mhm.
that um so what that indicates, correct me if I'm wrong, is that this eclipse is kind of portending um just a total shift in basically every single way that we live.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. This eclipse is going to affect every single way that we live. But the way that it's being affected, most of these are the ascendant, right? So most of these are going to be affecting, our nation's outward culture, the way our nation is displayed, right? So that's like a really big theme is that, yes, just like you pointed out, Allie, everything about the way our country is seen, every major planet is being covered. So every way part of our culture and the way we're seen is shifting during this eclipse.
And we probably won't see a massive event that exact day, right? This is
Yes.
really just showing that, well, I liked your comparison of the ascendant to like opening the front door. It's like we're opening the door to a
Mhm.
new thing. And then but like actually walking into the house and seeing like, oh, this is a new place. Like it kind of takes a little bit longer than just like bam, right that minute, right?
Yes, exactly. This is a shift, and I think that's as we're kind of setting this up, something good to talk about is, trends with eclipses and what eclipses actually mean for people, right? And that applies to countries as well. We know that as we've looked back through history and what happens during eclipses, we can see that often they mark the beginning of big shifts, the beginning and starting of something. There was a really great episode for anyone who's really curious from the Astrology Podcast. That's what it's called, the Astrology Podcast, all about the history of eclipses. And, eclipses often mark the birth and deaths of royalty. If you were born during an eclipse, the eclipse often marks a big shift in your life. Big events usually happen during eclipses for people who were born under eclipses. And if we think about that, even to Jesus Christ, when he died, there was an eclipse. They said the sun was gone right after he died. There was a great darkness. And so, his death was marked by an eclipse. And so eclipses show us, big shifts, big pivotal points and shifting. And sometimes that means there is some kind of big event during the eclipse, but usually what that means is it's like the first domino, right? We've knocked over the first domino and then the domino is going to keep going and we can kind of see the resounding echoes of it as these eclipses go on.
I just want to say I just Googled up that there was a total okay, it was a total lunar eclipse, and then there was a, let's see, a solar eclipse in July of 1776, which I think is kind of interesting, like going along with these same themes. So So interesting. But again, I always like to remind people we have like 4 to 6 eclipses every single year. So there's always
Mhm.
eclipses happening. What's special about this one is that it is a total solar eclipse happening over the United States where you can actually see it because most of the time, most of the world is unable to visually see the eclipses that are happening because they're happening over the ocean. They're happening over Antarctica or whatever. So and then because it's like the other half of this 7 year alignment of two eclipses that make an X across America. So that's why this one is unusual, but we have a lot of eclipses, just to clarify that for everybody.
Mhm. Yeah, we do have a lot of eclipses. And like you said, this one is particularly important and the reason we're talking so much about America is because that's where the eclipse is, passing over. And so that has particular meaning for our own country, for the people who live here. Not that it doesn't affect everyone. Everyone is affected by an eclipse. I'm sure anyone who's noticed eclipse season or felt it knows that no matter if it's over the ocean or not, you feel it. But this one is, we're looking at the significance that it's going to have on the world. And so what I'm using right now is what's called a geodetic map, and that's specifically for world events, specifically for looking at what is happening in the world.
So I know you came with like stuff to talk about, but I have a question. Can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So you know that I'm from Maryland, and
Hmm.
looking at this map, I'm seeing a bunch of little lines going right through Maryland, and you know what that means? They're cutting right through Washington, D.C., and I'm really
Hmm.
interested to know what those lines are and what is the significance of these lines cutting through my hometown slash I don't mean it for my hometown. What I care about is that it is the seat of our government. What does it mean
Right,
to have
right,
this little hotspot um
right.
going on?
Yeah. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this so we can get a little bit closer. DC is this tiny little area. I don't know if people can see it. See where it says
That's the little
Arlington?
square.
Yep, it's that little square right there. And so, yeah, oftentimes when lines pass through an area, right, it means that something big is happening in that area. This one, we do have a bunch of these lines. These yellow lines we're not going to talk about quite as much, but these are called parent lines, and the parent lines also show energy, but their energy is a lot more it's a lot less powerful than the other lines. It only has a 60-mile radius, whereas these lines, even though they're not going straight through DC, this sun line and this chiron line, they have a 600-mile radius of power, so they still count going through DC, even though they're not right on DC. But the interesting thing that we're seeing happen here, right? What is directly going through DC? The moon line, the moon ascendant, right? Wearing your emotions on your sleeve. This also could be right things coming and being illuminated. Things that were in the dark are being now illuminated for everybody to uh, to see. And that's what the moon is. What is your heart? Where's your heart at? What do you really value? What do you really treasure? We talked about the house before. If the ascendant is the front door, the moon sign is much more like the master bedroom. So, we're kind of going back, and this master bedroom, whatever's going on in DC in this region is kind of being revealed because it's an ascendant line. So it's like all of a sudden, someone is at the door and suddenly they're in the master bedroom, right? They're seeing the whole house.
Surprise.
Yes, a surprise whole house. The other thing that's happening, right? So that's going to be the biggest thing, right? Big things being illuminated. I would say with this, since this parent is crossing so close, we're also talking about Ceres and Neptune, right? Which have this idea of spirituality and the home. Ceres is about, the seasons. She's connected to the idea of, winter, spring, famine, and abundance, the harvest, the law of the harvest, right?
Supply
So
chain.
this, yes, exactly. Supply chain, all those kinds of things. So even like a spiritual supply chain here because we have Neptune, but Neptune's also water, right? So there could be this idea of water supply, right? How is our water supply being affected?
You know,
things
there's a
that are
really
going
great
on.
book called The End of the World as We Know It is just the
Hmm.
beginning. That's what it's called. Or it's called The End of the World is just the beginning. And I thought I had it right next to me, but I don't. It's really good. 10 out of 10 recommend. But he talks about how um, the entirety of life, as everyone on the whole world knows it, is about to shift because of impending changes in the United States naval system and like how the
Mm.
United States is going to be forced to handle naval issues like because the right now the US is the world's policeman on global waterways, and as soon as that is no longer possible or feasible, things are going to have to shift, and it's going to have this huge ramification on international trade. A really good book, but that's like my first thing I'm thinking like, okay, are we looking at, again, not on April 8th, but perhaps over the next year or 2 years, um, I think even up to the next 9 years, because we're dealing with the 18-year cycle of eclipses, and then that puts us at the halfway point. Are we
Hmm.
going to be seeing some real shifts in international trade because of water disruptions on the water?
Yeah, that is very interesting. And I think that's something that is very viable because we all know we've had such issues with water. I mean, I'm someone who comes from California, so water was an issue my whole life. Water law, I lived where there was lots of water, but for people who don't know, Southern California has a huge water problem, right? And California's had huge droughts, things like that. And so,
Well, and
water
Utah
really is
does
an issue.
too. Yeah, tons of water
Yeah.
concerns.
Yes, tons of water concerns. And it's interesting that it's hitting DC because it's this idea, these lines, these parent lines, they run all the way across, right? Because they're running east to west. So it's going to run all the way across. So if we look to the other end, right, and we follow this line, we kind of have to keep our eye on it here, right? It's going to
I'm like,
run
where's the
through
line?
yes. Sorry. It's if we
Oh,
look
so that's the same. No, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, I
So
see it.
here's
I see
if you
it.
look where Baltimore is, right? These
Okay.
two lines are the ones that we're following. Here's that Ceres Neptune line, right? And it's going to pass right through Utah, right? With this
Yeah.
60-mile radius. It's going to go through Colorado Springs, Denver, and then all the way back across to the
Oh,
upper
wow.
part of California. Yeah,
Wow, wow, wow. Okay.
yeah. So all those things are very important. Now we're seeing the Maryland side, sorry, because I clicked on Maryland, but same lines we
The
can
true
see. This
state.
is the line we're talking about here. So, that might be a ripple effect. Obviously, those regions, there are other lines passing through those regions, so they'll get a different effect. But yeah, here with all these lines passing through Washington D.C., right? I would say, our heart on our sleeve, some emotions being exposed, something light coming out of the darkness, and perhaps something around water, supply chain, food, but also maybe the change of spirituality in the family structure. Because Saris very much is about like motherhood, family relationship, womanhood, which is something we'll talk about in a minute with this eclipse. Um, but there's also, right, we've got this sun line going through, which is the identity, who are you really, and showing who you are really. So that's something that's an energy that's kind of going to be highlighted during this eclipse. And then, of course, this is the other line that's going to kind of, well, let's measure this Mercury line because I bet you it's close enough. Yep, it's only 90 miles away. So this one will also count. But this Chiron line, right? What wounds are being exposed? What things are coming out that weren't there before, or maybe have been there, but we haven't been able to see them. For you, Allie, when you think about Chiron on the ascendant, what comes to mind?
Well, when I see a chart with Chiron on the ascendant, my sense is that if it, on a person, that their entire life, first off, their experience of their life tends to trigger up all their wounds all the time until they learn how to
Mm,
transform it into mastery, until they learn how to not be triggered and step into this space of um, feeling like they can control themselves instead of being triggered all the time. But I also find that people with Chiron close to the ascendant often trigger the Chirons in other people just by interacting
Mm.
with them. Because when you're interacting with somebody else, it's like your ascendant and their ascendant are like, they're interacting, at least
Mhm.
in an initial, like when you meet each other at a party or something like that. As you
Mhm.
start to to know each other more and interact in different places, it's a little different. But when your ascendant is interacting with somebody else's ascendant and your ascendant is also Chiron, it's like, bam, got any soul wounds I can trigger for you today? So I'm sitting here
True.
thinking, okay, we're gonna see um, probably our own big wounds showing up as a nation, but that's also going to trigger the chirons of all the other nations that interact with us, which happens to be everybody because we interact with everybody. I think in a way that many other countries do not. Like there are a lot of countries in this world with a very limited scope of influence, but that is not true for the US. The US has a little finger in every pie you can imagine. And we're gonna trigger that Chiron energy in everybody. I don't know if that's true, but that's my immediate thought about this.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely the wounds that are seeable, right? Because it's the rising sign, the ascendant. It's things are going to be bright as noonday, you know. And that's what we're kind of showing here. Things are going to be bright as noonday. It's triggering this, show your wounds and also, maybe triggering other people's wounds, like you said, because we interact with them. And then finally, this line, this Mercury ascendant line here, right, is the way that we communicate with other nations and with our own people, the way that what we're talking about, the information that's coming through. So this is information that is actually being heard and seen and coming out. And so possible changes in information, what we hear, what we communicate, what gets communicated down to us. Um, Even things like our contracts with other nations, our deals, the things that we've made by word of mouth as a nation to other nations and to our own people, right? What we've promised. This would also be things about the Constitution, right? Because it's Mercury. It's the contract that we have made as the United States with our people. So I would expect, this is a little farther away, but it's not, when these lines have a 600-mile radius, 90 miles away is not far. On an actual chart, 90 miles away looks like 1 or 2 degrees away.
Wow.
So this is still quite close, conjunct, maybe not as tight as these ones are, but that energy is still quite strong.
So I have
So,
two things to say, or two questions, but I need to ask both of them. They're really important. Okay, just to make sure we don't
yes,
lose
yes,
one.
of course, of
Okay,
course.
but the first one, okay, so somebody was saying like the fact that this eclipse, there's all these Ninevehs along the lines of the eclipse, but they're not all in totality. Some of them just see part of
Right.
it, and she was saying, well, it doesn't, that's not really significant because half of the country will get to see part of the eclipse. But my
Mhm,
thought was, that's still a big deal. This is an enormous planet. Like this is an enormous
mhm,
planet.
mhm.
And um yeah, so half of the country will see part of the eclipse, but that's to me that like it still seems significant to me just based on the sheer size that we're working with. Does that make any sense?
Oh, totally. Yeah, it does. It is still significant. I mean, when we talk about an eclipse, on a personal level, eclipses affect everybody all over the world, no matter where they are.
That's
Um,
true.
Yeah, so if we think about that, that's the power of this eclipse line, that it can reach everybody, right? That it's assigned to everyone, regardless if the eclipse is going over the ocean or if it's going over your hometown. It just means that the line of this eclipse is incredibly powerful, and it's going to be incredibly powerful for all of America because it's intensified in this space, right? It's viewable from this space. So the fact that all the Ninevehs are not right on the line or like seeing the totality of the eclipse, I don't think quite matters quite as much. You could take it many different ways that, because to me, when you think about the story of Jonah and Nineveh, the idea was the expectation was that Nineveh was not going to repent. That was the expectation that Jonah had, right? But Nineveh did end up repenting. And to me, that's almost symbolic of this idea of you have two choices. Here are the scales. You can choose not to repent or choose to repent. Some of you are in the dark, some of you are in the light, is one way to think about it.
Thank
So,
you. Okay, my
yeah,
other
go ahead.
question that I had was what are the odds that we're going to have this eclipse go this way and have the sun and the moon cutting right next to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, that's quite, I mean,
I mean, like that's the sun and the moon.
yeah,
The most
yeah,
important things in the chart cutting through Washington, D.C. when the eclipse does not.
yeah,
But the sun
yeah.
and moon lines do. That just seems like crazy to me. I don't work with this at all, but like is that as
Mhm.
crazy as I think it is?
Oh, it is. It's really crazy. I mean, like I think, we when there's an eclipse, we will see the sun and moon together, right? That's what we'd expect, is to see the sun and the moon together. But the fact that they are both cutting through Washington D.C., that's pretty crazy because the sun and the moon could be together over here in Texas, and still have the eclipse
Right.
passing through.
Right.
They could be over here, they could be anywhere, but the fact that they're cutting right through Washington, D.C., and they're so tight, that's a really tight um, conjunction, and very tightly through D.C. itself, honestly. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say it is quite unusual. And I don't know, I would not expect to see that quite so tightly there.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. Um, okay, guys, this is Lila Sage. She's my really good friend, and she's gonna come back in more videos. And so come on back tomorrow because we're gonna hear more from her about more really exciting things. Lila, really quick, can you just tell everybody where they can find you? She does these kind of readings for individuals, so you can like find out where you live or where you have lived and how it like aligns up with your life and stuff like that.
Yeah, if anyone would like to do an astrocartography reading with me, it's great for knowing where you want to go in the world. Like if you want to move, or where might be the best place for you to move to vacation, to work from, either remotely or physically. And it can have really powerful effects if you're going through difficult transits, things like that, or a hard time in your life. So, you can find me at lilasage.co. That's .co. And I do have a free, a PDF all about astrocartography. What is it? How does it work? And how you can apply it to yourself. And if you let me know that you came from Allie from these videos, I will give you a $50 discount off of a reading.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I didn't know that. That's so good. Okay, well,
Yeah,
thank you so much. I feel like I learned a lot and I can't wait to have you back tomorrow.
me too. Thanks so much, Allie.